The Tale of Joshua, chapters 1 through 8.
What does it take to step into the shoes of a legend? This is about Joshua, something that's very close and dear to my heart. And let me set the stage for who Joshua is, what he was doing, and why is he so important. Now, Joshua, before any of this starts, he is highly noted in Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Going through this, the first instance that we really see Joshua is the fight versus the Amalekites. The Amalekites are ready to go to war, they're ready to fight, and they're the ones who also jumped the Israelites as they were walking through the desert. Now, there's this 40 years that they're walking through. There's a lot of time that's going by for the Israelites to finally get to the promised land. A lot of us might think 40 years is a long time. Can we be obedient and faithful for 40 years? Something that Moses, the people, struggled with. Could you do that? As we look forward, we're going to see Joshua was an important figure even before he even got the title of being the new leader. So Joshua's story starts in Exodus 17, 8 through 16, where Joshua first appears during the battle against the Amalekites. Moses sends him to lead Israel's army while Moses, Aaron, and Hur hold up the staff of God on top of the hill. When Moses' hands stay raised, Israel wins, showing Joshua's first role as a warrior and leader. The next time that we see him is in this case of Exodus 24:13 and Exodus 33:11. Joshua becomes Moses' right-hand man, following up to Mount Sinai, staying at the tent of meeting where Moses spoke to God face to face. The next instance that we see him is in Numbers 13 through 14, the chapters. When Moses sends 12 spies to go scout the promised land, Joseph from the tribes of Ephraim and Caleb are the only two who trust God's promise and urge Israel to take the land. The other 10 spies spread fear, leading to Israel's rebellion and 40 years of wandering. The next time that we see Joshua is when he's commissioning as Moses' successor, which we can find in Numbers 27, 18 through 23, Deuteronomy 31, 7 through 8, and Deuteronomy 34, 9. As Moses is preparing to die, God appoints Joshua as the next leader. Moses lays hands on him and he is filled with the spirit of wisdom. Before his death, Moses encourages Joshua to be strong and courageous, something that we will see a lot through Joshua. Joshua's role leading up to his book, he was trained under Moses and deeply trusted in God's power. He had first-hand experience with Israel's struggles and victories. He was one of the very few from the older generation allowed to enter the promised land because of his faithfulness. By the time Joshua begins, he's stepping into Moses' shoes, leading Israel into the land that God has promised them. This is the preface to who Joshua is.
Joshua chapter 1.
As we can see, this is the first instance of where everybody does not have Moses as being their leader. Everybody's looking and turning toward who should be next, and as we can see through the previous preface, Joshua was the one who was chosen to be his successor. Now, Moses, deemed as the number 2, right underneath Jesus as the most important figure in the Bible, someone who was face to face with God, someone who we have the Mosaic laws, and then we have God and Jesus' laws when we get to the New Testament. These are the two standing points that we are looking at, the 10 Commandments, and then we look at what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount and what he goes down and basically list of, these are the most important things that we need to look at, but most importantly, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And love God above everything. We can see here there's a lot of just chaos going around. When someone as great as Moses passes away, there's a lot of expectations that a lot of us, even us today, even if our fathers or mothers or an important role at our job were to be dismissed or deceased, we would not have the ability to be able to just jump into that role because a lot of us have doubts, or maybe not even have doubts, but more concerns of, can you fill the shoes of this person that just left their position? This first chapter really strongly suggests that he should be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the laws my servant Moses has given you, and do not turn from it from the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Now, he also tells him to meditate on this book day and night. God is trying to set Joshua up to be the successor and leader that he had Moses be. When we look at this chapter and we look at these things, we're wondering, do the people agree? Do the people see what they see in Moses that they see in Joshua? God reiterates and says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua goes out and he orders the officers, the people, and he goes, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go take possession of the land the Lord your God has given you. Joshua also reiterates that God will give them rest and he will give them the land that they had put their foot on, just as God has told Joshua the same thing. This is the first instance where we can see Joshua really having a lot of faith and having to really trust God and really understand that it's not just about just doing what God says and just not just about walking away and leading a whole bunch of people. It's about having true faith and having true trust that the person who gave you the command has your best interest in mind and that whatever he says will come true. When we're reading through these stories, we have to understand many years will go by, many weeks, many days, and it may seem like, oh, this is just a few moments in time. This is years of obedience and years of faith and trust. And Joshua has already experienced all those in the 40 years he's already had to walk with God and seeing how he works and being faithful and understanding that God is going to deliver them because he's been there. He's seen it. He's been around for all those occasions. He understands that God is going to lead them to the promised land and have everything they set their foot on be theirs. And the interesting thing that we can see here is 3 times there's mention in this first chapter of being strong and being courageous. When we look at this and we understand that the fact that God works in numbers and you can see the numbers work, 3 is very important. It's symbolic. One of the first times God mentions being strong and courageous is in verse 6, verse 7, verse 9. He does that 3 times. Then Joshua comes back down and he tells them again in verse 18 to be strong and courageous and reiterates what God told him the first time. 3 in the Bible is usually symbolic for divine wholeness, completeness, and perfection, and particularly representing the Trinity. Before any of this has already gone down, this is a clear sign that God is trying to really show this the divine wholeness in what he's saying. The divinity and the peace and resurrection of this new land that God has promised will be complete if he does these things by being strong and courageous, obeying Moses' commands, and making sure he meditates it on day and night, and he will be successful. This is important to us because if we do not turn from the commands and if we understand what God wants for us and we are obedient to what he's asking of us and we meditate on these things day and night that he gives us, we will be successful as well. And we will also have a partnership with God. And most importantly, the good thing about this is the people in verses 16 through 18 say, then they answered Joshua, wherever you have commanded us, we will do. And wherever you will send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. Even the backing of the people and understanding that if the Lord was with Moses and Moses chose Joshua, and that's the last person that they knew was definitely connected to God, everything that Joshua said will be connected to God. Trust between the people. Remember, Moses was the interceding between the people and God. Now Joshua will be the same.
Joshua chapter 2.
This is very important. If any chapter really reaches and speaks to Joshua's cause, Joshua's people, this is about Rahab, the prostitute, and the spies that visited her and were under her protection. When we look through the Bible and we see a lot of these stories, we usually don't question why did God allow somebody who was a prostitute, who was a murderer, who was someone who was definitely not righteous at all, get the good graces and blessings from God. Why did he use that person instead of someone who was more faithful and righteous? Now, this may surprise you, but that case is a lot more regular than you know. Jesus has came from Rahab's line. Jesus has come from people who were faithful, but their sins can be pointed out easily. Now, Rahab is also in the Hall of Faith. This is important. This is a very important chapter. And I want to dive in and just give you guys a new lens on what really was going on. So Joshua, he sends in some spies. Remember, Joshua was one of the 2 spies that came back to Moses during the time that he sent the spies. So Joshua, in his wisdom and understanding, he's not going to send more spies than he has to. So he only sends 2 because he believes only 2 spies are enough. He then has ultimate trust that they're going to go over and they're going to look at Jericho. Now, they looked over the whole land, but Jericho was very important. They entered and they stayed at the prostitute's house of Rahab. Now, the king of Jericho knew that there were spies coming. He had insight. He knew something was wrong. So he goes to Rahab and goes, hey, bring out those men that came into your house because I know they're spies. Rahab deliberately lies and says, they've already ran away. By the time that the gate was going to close, they ran back. If you hurry after them, you will find them. But she hid them in the roof of her house. Now, this is very important because there is something that people sometimes say, when is it okay to lie? When is it okay to do the things that God says not to do because he's doing this? Now, Rahab knew that God had sent them, that their God was someone to be feared. She heard about the time that the Red Sea was opened up when they were escaping Egypt. They heard about the times where the Amorites were destroyed when they had to fight. There has been a lot of conversations about how good and great the Lord and powerful and fearful he is, for there is no other God in heaven above and on earth below. Now, Rahab, understanding the situation, she thinks big brained and says, you know what? If you guys come, which you will, and you guys don't destroy my family, I won't tell the king that you guys were here. I'll even help you guys out and help you escape. So the spies go, you know what? Our lives for your lives. Then the men assured her, if you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she lets him down by the ropes. She tells him to go hide in the hills for 3 days. It's just going to be a lot because 3 days is essential for everything they do. They always wait for 3 days. There's 3 days this, 3 days here, 3 days that. Remember, 3 is very important. It's very important. It's wholeness. During this time, sometimes you can read this like, maybe did they stay for 3 days? Who knows? But we understand that during this chapter, during this part, people are going to be saying 3 a lot. In verse 17, it says, now the men had said to her, this oath you have made us swear will not be binding on us, unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you will let us down. And unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house, if any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from this oath you made us swear. Rahab replies, agreed. Let it be as you have said. They go about their way. She ties a scarlet cord in her window. And when they left, they stayed in the hill for 3 days, just like Rahab has told them. And then when they returned and went down the hill and they went up the river, they came back to Joshua and said, it's game time. This land will be ours like the Lord has said. Everybody is melting in fear because of us. This chapter can be overlooked. This chapter can be seen as, what's the central theme or the purpose of this? We're going to see somebody who's out of the norm, who we think that doesn't have faith in God because of their actions during the day or their profession, and we really find out that she becomes one of the main people who are in the Hall of Faith and who are recommended and who are also in Jesus' line. God is looking for your faith more than he is trying to criticize you on your actions. Rahab had faith in the Lord that if she does the good and righteous deed under the Lord and understanding who the Lord is, he would protect her family. Now, when we're reading Joshua, this is a complete conquest. We don't come across many people who do it like Rahab in the correct way. But Rahab is remembered and forever talked about in the Jewish faith and even today in our Christian faith for her act of faith in understanding that the Lord is a righteous, loving, and graceful God. And he will protect us, even if the actions and professions and the things of the world that people look at us as, you're dirty or you do the wrong thing, this and that. It's what's in our heart and what we believe that God has done for us.
Joshua chapter 3.
So the Israelites are getting ready to cross over the Jordan. Remember, they've already had the moments of the Red Sea, but this is a different generation of people who have not seen that besides Joshua. Joshua and Caleb are probably one of the oldest people that really have seen that happen. Because remember, during the desert times, all those people who were in that generation died off for being rebellious. So these are the kids of those people who have not seen this happen yet. Starting in verse 1, early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set up from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, remember, 3 is important, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord, your God, and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Now, 2,000 cubits is roughly half a mile, so about 800 meters away from the covenant of the ark. Continuing in verse 5, Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourself, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Joshua said to the priests, "Take up the ark of the covenant and pass on ahead of the people." So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you." So Joshua goes out and tells the people exactly what God has said. And he says that he will drive out all the enemies in the land that they are afraid of, that they know of, and that he will provide them the land. He also says that the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. He also says, choose 12 men from the tribe of Israel, one from each tribe, and as soon as the priests who carried the ark of the Lord set foot in the Jordan, the waters in it, which is flowing downstream, will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So everyone listened to Joshua. They broke up into the camps. Now, during this time, the Jordan is in a flood stage. It's flooding. Like, this is usually like when we have a time of a lot of rainfall, and if you're around the areas of Illinois or anywhere close, the Sangamon River, when there's a lot of rain, it overflows and it floods. And we have a lot of things that usually wash up onto the banks, the shores, and we're like, man, the river's overflowing. It's flooding. It's flooding. And we've all been there. We've seen that before. And if you haven't, it's quite a sight to see. It's sometimes very scary. So it goes on and says in verse 15, now the Jordan is at a flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from the upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down the sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over the opposite of Jericho. The priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all of Israel passed by until the whole nation had completely crossed over on dry ground. Now, something that's very important and key that I want to point out. In Joshua 13:16, it says, when the Israelites crossed the Jordan River, the water stood and rose up in a heap far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. The city of Adam is believed to have been about 18 to 20 miles upstream from where the Israelites crossed near Jericho. Zarethan is mentioned in other parts of the Bible, like 1 Kings 7:46, and is thought to be nearby, reinforcing that stoppage of the water happened far upstream. This means the miracle affected a massive stretch of the Jordan, not just a small area. The fact that the water stopped so far upstream also suggests God was setting things in motion before the Israelites even stepped into the river. It shows how God was already working ahead of them before they even took the first steps of faith. A lot of times, God will tell us that we need to do something that is for our own good. And before we even take the first steps, God was already moving and making things happen. So when you did take that first step, it became more of a miracle than understanding that God was making all these things happen in a concise, precise way before it even happened to get to you. I know a lot of times we can go to church and we can hear a message and be like, man, this was meant for me. But God has set that thing, that person, that outside ability in motion to have it start for you. If you're obedient, the things God has planned and set into motion will get to you faster than you being disobedient, trying to ask God, what is this? What am I supposed to be doing? The obstacle seems big, but God is great.
Joshua chapter 4.
Let's start off by reading this chapter so we can get a good idea of what's actually going on. Starting in verse 1. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you are staying tonight. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. Now, some may think that these stones are still there today, and they are. Some people have tried to put out 12 different stones before, but a lot of people say that when you see the 12 stones of where they placed them at, it is very recognizable of where they are at and what they are doing there. When you read forward into the verses, you see that Joshua commanded them, and the 12 stones were taken from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, just as the Lord had told Joshua. Joshua set up all of these 12 stones, and they are still there to this day. As an indication, as if you believe and you're trying to understand that Joshua and his people do these things, there is monuments, places of where it actually happened at. And if you take that 20 miles from where they stepped foot from the Jordan, from the Adam, you can see where these exact landing marks are. Now, this is very important, because I know for a lot of us, when we look forward into the scriptures and we understand he had a Levitical priest. You see later on in stories like 2 Samuel, where David does not have Levitical priests carry the ark, and his friend Uzzah dies. But Joshua makes sure to carry out the exact commands that God had left Moses to the very T. Now, roughly about 120,000 people passed over from the Jordan over into the other part of the land. 40,000 of these people were armed men ready for war. This is very important in the decree for the Lord, because Joshua repeats the commands and repeats what he said about the 12 stones, and then reinstates why he did it at the very end. If you look down and you see that in verse 24, he did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Before that, as soon as the Levitical priests took their feet from the Jordan, walked up onto the land, not a step further did they walk than the Jordan came back and swelled back up to having an overflow flood for harvest. What can we learn about those things in this Joshua part? One, a lot of times when God does a miracle or blessing for us, we don't usually set up a monument, but we also tend to forget why it happened. A lot of the people, when the Red Sea happened, are asking, did that happen? Everybody knows it happened, but how do we know? Joshua set up this event like there will not be a second time where we would forget that our Father God, the most powerful God and only God, the one that's above heaven and on earth, we will never forget what he has done today. One, we need to have moments in our lives where we do either set up a monument or set up a big memorial for us to remember what God has done for us. We tend to forget that a lot of times God does these amazing things and we move on with life and we tune to forget what's going on. Also with this, it's very important to recognize that Joshua did not turn left or right from the commands that Moses had given them, even down to having the Levitical priests carry the ark. For some, that is a small, minute detail. Later in the Bible, when it happens with David, as mentioned before, it is soon forgotten. Anyone is carrying it. Any way that's supposed to be carried, any way that's supposed to be moved around, and God dealt with that issue. So we look at this and we see, okay, these 12 stones, these 12 tribes, these people were doing it. And on the 10th day, these people were in Gilgal. And this is important because this is a sign for the descendants to come that God has been here. He has been present. He has been around. There has not been a moment we have not had God near us. God works in 3, 7, and 10s. So on the 10th of them doing this and having this be done is the significance of saying God's presence has always been around them. Not only this is an act of faith and obedience carried out by the Israelites, but it is one of the many examples of the great demonstrations of God's power and willingness to prepare his people and to have things happen without them even knowing it was going to happen for them in the first place. We can look at a lot of the things God does in our lives and think, man, God is so good. He's so powerful. His timing is so amazing. But we also forget that the Israelites had to carry out this ability of obeying God to the T without straying from the path, even though the waters were uncertain. God is watching. He is there, and he's leading us to things that sometimes we may not think are the best decisions. But like Jeremiah 29:11, God has good plans for all.
Joshua chapter 5.
This chapter goes in about how Joshua had to circumcise all the Israelites again, according to God. As it says in verse 2, at the time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. This explains that the reason why that he had to circumcise everyone was because all the men who were with them traveling in that 40-year span, they were not the original ones who had left Egypt. They were the sons, the next generation of the Israelites. They ended up dying out because they disobeyed God. In those 40 years, they all came deceased. Just as said in those other chapters where it was a foreshadowing and telling of why those things were happening to them, this chapter explains exactly why it happened in fine detail and get us a clear insight of why God was working the way he was. Now, the Lord never forgot his promise with the Israelites. He never forgot that he was going to give them this land. He never forgot his promise with their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He never forgot. This is very important because
It says, "For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land he had solemnly promised their ancestors to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey." This is about the people who were previously disobeying God before these children of the next 40 years of Joshua who are there now. In verse 7 it says, "So he raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua in verse 9, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So the place has been called Gilgal to this day. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal, on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. Now, all this time leading up to this, they were still getting manna from the sky. They were still getting those blessings, still getting those things that God was providing and causing provisions. It makes you wonder, just man, all this time until they got to this land, God was still providing. Why would you not believe? Why would you not have trust? Why would you not think that God is taking care of you and putting you out there on a better lifestyle than you had before? You saw it with Moses, and he's still doing it with Joshua. You're still getting provided things out the sky that you really shouldn't have gotten. The most important thing about this is God made sure to hold true to what he said, and made sure that even though the people who weren't circumcised at a certain time, he made sure that they were circumcised, because that was the promise that Abraham originally had with God, and God was going to keep it. God was going to keep his promises no matter what it was, who was leading, and what was going on. God is a faithful God to his word and faithful to us when we are faithful to him. And this chapter beautifully explains that. Later on in verse 13, it says, "Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, 'Are you for us or for our enemies?' 'Neither,' he replied, 'but as the commander of the army of the Lord I have now come.' Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, 'What message does my Lord have for his servant?' The commander of the Lord's army replied, 'Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy.' And Joshua did so." This is an interesting point, because remember the burning bush around Exodus 3:14, where Moses had the same experience where he was in the presence of the Lord. And God said, "Take off your sandals, for this is a holy place." Now, a lot of these stories, when you hear them and you go back and look at them, a lot of this stuff can be matched and mimicked up to Moses and how he was traveling. So almost everything that Moses was really going through, Joshua also had that happen. But then there were some things that Joshua had a greater blessing or a greater one-time off, or one time, this is going to go down one time for you, was more for his journey and his path and his way for the Israelites to see that he was meaning business, that God really favored Joshua, and that Joshua really was the next one up that should be revered and respected. But as you can tell, Joshua went out to this person and heard that they were from the Lord's army, and immediately knew what was going on and paid his respects and listened to this person, as he understood that this had happened to Moses once before. This chapter goes into understanding that circumcision of the Israelites still keep the promises and the covenant that God had originally, and he didn't want to break that. He wanted everyone to be all in, all aboard, and as soon as they all had those things, which was circumcision, crossed the Jordan, put up the monuments, they ate from the land that God promised them, and then he stopped sending manna down because his promises were starting to be established. Those things are important to the story. God didn't stop providing for them. He led them to a place where he was already getting the land ready for them to overtake. There is a difference. When you take steps of obedience and you take steps in the right steps that God wants you to do, he will provide on any standard, on any measure. Sometimes when God comes to us, it comes to in a form that we may feel like a foreign enemy or something that we do not understand. But God and the apostles also have said before, test the spirit by its fruits. The commander came to Joshua and was ready to deliver a command straight from the Lord. Joshua, knowing everything that Moses has written, everything that he knew that this was a time that this was serious and this person was not going to trick them. It was from the Lord. But the only way he knew was from reading the things that Moses has put down before and knowing the commands and the stories that Moses has written before. We should mimic those things too. because you never know who's really from the Lord unless you know your Father, unless you know Jesus. You have a relationship. So when that message comes to you, you know what it is. You know it is from your Holy Father, from your brother Jesus, from your King, your Shepherd. You know who sent the message.
Joshua chapter 6.
Now, here's the most famous story in the Old Testament. I don't care what you say. It could be Adam and Eve. It could be about wrestling with God, changing his name from Jacob to Israel. But this right here, maybe even opening the Red Sea, crossing the Jordan. But this is the fable of Joshua that everybody remembers and knows about him. The fall of Jericho. Now, previously, after everybody who was around Joshua and the Israelites heard about the opening up of the Jordan, everybody had their hearts melted and they were scared. Here we hear the direct instructions from God, how close and fine detail that Joshua made sure to go by those words, and the outcome of what happened when he was obedient, followed the instructions, and did what God said carefully and had faith that it would work. Starting in verse 1. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho in your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in." So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And he ordered the army, "Advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the army, "Do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout, then shout." So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to camp and spent the night there. As we can see so far, as we read up to verse 11, everything God has said had been carefully carried out. Now you could be saying there's some details that don't make sense. How did he know just to do once and do this one thing? Or how did he know just to go around and have all these things happen and the way that he said they were supposed to be? Understanding God, having a relationship with him, and understanding who he is and understanding what has happened in the past when you fight many battles with the Lord, you start to understand the relationship. You start understanding the mind of, okay, God would want this instead of this way. And a lot of times when you're locked in with God and you make the best decision possible, he respects that because you have your heart and your mind on God and what you believe what God would want, and he goes off of that. Resuming in verse 12, Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. Take note, 3, 7, and 10, symbologies of that the Lord is near. There's big, heavy indications of 3s, 7s, and if you can find the 10, then the Lord is near and there. Also take note, throughout these chapters, a lot of things are repeating itself. In the Jewish world, when things repeat itself, it is deemed to be remembered and very important. So let's continue. Verse 15, on the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day, they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise you will make the camp of the Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and the gold and the articles of bronze and the iron are sacred to the Lord, and must go into his treasury. You may be rereading this chapter and being like, God did not say take all that stuff and devote it and all those things. In Deuteronomy, in Numbers, in Exodus, when they were fighting different people, the Lord has already given this decree and has already put out, this is what you do when you go to war. God sometimes divvies up and tells you, okay, I want everybody to burn. Everybody, I don't want nothing to be taken from here. But like I said before, Joshua is a great leader. He's been around. This new generation has not been around as long as Caleb and Joshua. And this is a very important part because Joshua knows battle tactics and knows how God works. Because of a strong relationship and having faith and seeing God work and believing that God will work, he wants to follow everything to a T. Resuming in verse 20. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the two men who had spied on the land, go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her. So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and her mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it. But they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into this treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. And at that time Joshua pronounced this solemn oath, cursed before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild this city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. If we go back and look at Joshua 1, when God says, be very strong, be very courageous, obey everything that Moses has written, and do not turn left or to the right of it. Meditate it day and night, and you will be successful. This is an instance where that truly did happen. Everything that he knew but happened before and everything that they're doing now is because Joshua knew the word, respected the word, and God gave him success by him being faithful and obedient. Now, it took a lot of steps for those moments to happen, but with that happening, we were able to see the blessings and the success that God provided for his people in hard times. Also, keep note later on when you were reading the Old Testament about what Joshua said about the people who will rebuild Jericho. For words and declarations under the Lord, anyone who breaks that oath and you are God's people, it comes back on to you. Keep that in mind. Your words are powerful. God created the earth, us, everything in it, the stars, with his words. So understand, when you speak, it holds power. Be obedient, follow God, and seek him out. And don't turn from his words left or right, and you will be successful as Joshua was as well.
Joshua chapter 7.
This is an important part in understanding what really happens when we disobey God. Maybe it's not you directly, maybe it's not just someone in your immediate circle, but whoever is around and hears the commands of God, and they are a part of your system, a part of your family, a part of your direct connection to how you are moving about, it does harm everybody in the system. This is a very important part where the Israelites, they're going over to the next person to go take over, which is AI. They're going out, oh, we should be able to take these guys easy. Send a couple thousand. We'll do this easy. But then 36 of them die. And they come back running in fear. And Joshua is so distraught because he's like, what happened? We're supposed to take everyone in your land. What's going on? And he's praying in front of the ark until evening. And other people come up and they do this thing, like it says, they sprinkle dust on their heads. Basically coming to Lord and just bowing their heads like, man, I am so distraught. It's basically saying, I'm very distraught. I'm very hurt. What could we have done wrong? I have shame. And Father God comes back and he's like, raise your head. What? Y'all sinned. That's why this happened. You guys have sinned in front of me. Basically pitying God, or not just pitying God, but playing him as a fool. As if somebody could get away with their sins after he gave a direct order and they can hide, as if God does not see all things. Starting in verse 6. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord. remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, "At last, sovereign Lord, why did you even bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say? Now that Israel has been routed by its enemies, the Canaanites and the other people of this country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?" The Lord said to Joshua, "Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things they have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to the destruction. Go consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. In the morning, present yourself tribe by tribe. The tribe the Lord chooses shall come forward clan by clan. The clan the Lord chooses shall come forward family by family. And the family the Lord chooses shall come forward man by man. Whoever is caught with the devoted thing shall be destroyed by fire, along with all that belongs to him. He has violated the covenant of the Lord and has done an outrageous thing in Israel." Remember back in that last chapter in Joshua 6, they literally were supposed to take all the devoted things, all the riches, the iron, the gold, and give it to God and put it in his temple. Put it with the holy place of God. They've already been warned, and they have also have dealt with Moses that they were supposed to do this anyway. We can be like this sometimes. We get a direct demand from God, see the riches, see the worldly things, and go, I think I'm going to go with that. That seems good. I like it a lot. But as we read forward, there is a very, very harsh consequence when this happens. In verse 16 through 18, Joshua does just that early next morning, goes clan by clan, tribe by tribe, family by family, and then he gets down to Achan. And this is what he says in verse 19. Then Joshua said to Achan, "My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me." Achan replied, "It is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels. I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with silver underneath." So Joshua sent the messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent with the silver underneath. They took the things from the tent, brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. Then Joshua, together with all of Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had to the valley of Acre. Joshua said, "Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today." Then all Israel stoned him, and after they stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore, the place has been called the Valley of Acre ever since. Now, doing some rough research, I looked up how much a shekel costs. A shekel of today would cost about $8 to $14. He took 50 shekels of gold, 200 shekels of silver, and a beautiful robe. Now, this can roughly be looked at around maybe $500 to $5,000, depending on how much the rarity of these items were of that time. But let's say for today's standard, he took about $3,000 worth of things. Out of the $3,000 worth of stuff he took, he was stoned and burned to death. The consequences for misusing and abusing God's power comes with an immense consequence. When God bestows his blessings and his powers upon us, do we go back behind his back and find the worldly values of what he gives us? And do we extract what we can get out of it and hide the good values and not really give our best to God? He provided us to win the battles and the wars that we got through and give us the positions we are at. Why do we not give back or actually give to the people God wants us to give to? Why do we take the devoted things that God wants us to be devoted to him and take it and cherish it for our own? There's not a lot of instances in today's modern world that we see that when someone gets something, a blessing or a devotion, that God is really requiring from them, that it ends up in death. But we also can see in today's times that a lot of times we put money in our own empire in front of God, we lose the true value of chasing and loving and pursuing shalom. As Jesus says, you cannot have two masters. You either love God or you love money. And this is one of the very first cases that we can really see where that rule applies. Are you an Achan who hides the devoted things from God? Or will you be like the rest of Israel and believe and trust that God will give you so much more than the measly $3,000 that you could easily have gotten from God, or even more, or provided you land that could serve your family for years and years to come? Achan is a strong example of being disobedient and taking that worldly sense and abusing God's power.
Joshua chapter 8.
Starting in verse 1, the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourself. Send ambush behind the city." Right here, God is a very good father, reassuring his children that do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. We're still in here. We can still do this. A little bit of discipline had to go down. And if Achan would have just waited, if he would have just waited, he would have had his own plunder for himself. Sometimes we are too impatient for God's blessings that comes our way, and we just do it ourselves. We do it ourselves. We do it however we want to do it. And we come back and realize God just like, man, just around the corner, you were going to be able to have your own stuff anyway. But you wanted to do it on your own. You wanted to do it how you wanted to do it, and you wanted to steal and hide from me. I was just going to give you some stuff on the next little trip down the way anyway. This next enemy you guys are going to fight, I was just going to let you take their stuff regardless. So this is a fine lesson. Just 2 verses in the next chapter, how graceful and just how opportunist God is for us when we just listen and obey and try not to hide things from God. He already sees it. Now, this is where we get into that point of, how does Joshua know what to do off of these simple words of what God said? But we need to understand that Joshua was a great commander. He fought majority, if not maybe 85% of all the battles of the Promised Land and before. So Joshua is a very good commander and understands how to run and do battle. Starting in verse 3. So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 of his best fighting men and sent them out at night. Remember, he did 3,000 the first time. Now they're doing 10 times that. 10. Remember what I said about 10? With these orders, listen carefully. You are to set an ambush behind the city. Don't go very far from it. All of you will be on alert. I and all those with me will advance on the city. And when the men come out against us, as they did before, we will flee from them. They will pursue us until we have lured them away from the city. For they will say, they are running away from us as they did before. So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from the ambush and take the city. The Lord your God will give it into your hand. When you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do what the Lord has commanded. See to it you have my orders. Then Joshua sent them off, and they went to the place of ambush and lay in wait between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. But Joshua spent the night with the people. Great leaders usually send people off and say, all right, yada, yada, do what you got to do. I'm going to stay back and protect myself. But Joshua is a man of courage, a man of faith. He's going to be with the people. He's going to inspire them. As we can see from different TV shows like The Vikings or Game of Thrones, when the king is around, oh yeah, everybody's inspired. Everybody wants to be near the king because he has God with him. He's the closest to God. And most importantly, he gives you great morale when he is around. Now, this part, early the next morning, he makes sure to go and bring 5,000 men and set them up in a particular spot right in the middle of the valley in Ai, just so they can make sure they have their plan set in motion. He did exactly what the plan that he gave them. He made sure that when all the men of Ai pursued them, not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. They left the city wide open. So those people who were sitting back just waiting for their opportunity went in and burned the town. They set the city on fire. and they captured it very quickly. And when the men of Ai and Bethel saw it, they turned around and saw that, and they were like, oh, we need to run back. Now they had everybody of the Israelites surrounding them, ready to take them and take back and have the revenge that God has set out for them to have. They made sure to ambush them, and they cut down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. Now, I want to point out an important part in the story that reminds me of Moses holding up his staff versus the Amorites. In verse 18, it says, Then the Lord said to Joshua, Hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city. So Joshua held out toward the city the javelin that was in his hand. As soon as he did this, the men in this ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. Then they had the ambush where they had the Ai men trapped and they were surrounded. And then in verse 24 it says, When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. But Israel did carry off for themselves the livestock and the plunder of the city, as the Lord had instructed Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolate place to this day. He impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole and left it there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take the body from the pole and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate, and they raised a large pile of rocks over it, which remains to this day. Now, this information that I'm going to say is from the Bema of understanding that Joshua was very compassionate. Even though he did and put the king up on a pole and put his body up there, that was the thing that they did in that surrounding area to show and put fear into the other people who were coming by, like, oh man, they mean business. But Joshua took him down by evening. I don't even think that's enough time for people to come around and see what's going on. Let's just say you're at work, and by the time you get off work, you maybe have, what's going on? There was a king up on a pole. What's happening? And before you know it, he's already down. So you're like, is this fake news? What's going on? But you heard about it. Joshua was not like everybody who was surrounding them. He was not like the people that put him up there like, look what we did. Look at our armies. Look what's going on. He did it to instill fear. But most importantly, he brought him down and still paid the respects of burying him and putting rocks above him, just like he did Achan and everybody else who usually dies on that trip. The respect and honesty and the livelihood of Joshua really plays a strong part into why God chose Joshua and saw a lot of him that he saw about Moses. Continuing in verse 30, Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel. And as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites, he built according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool has been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. I want to point out that Joshua did not turn from the commands that Moses gave them, and he did exactly as it was written to the T. He followed details. He followed the script. He did what God said and was very obedient. Continuing in verse 32, There in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on a stone a copy of the law of Moses. All the Israelites with their elders, officials, and judges were standing on both sides of the ark of the covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native born were there. Half of the people stood in front of them at Mount Gerizim, and half of them at the Mount of Ebal, as Moses the servant of the Lord had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Afterward, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it was written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. A lot of times when we have our own victories and we have our own blessings, we forget to go back and remember what God did for us or remember the teachings that God has shown us. We sometimes just step forward and just continue our lives forgetting that God was the one who ultimately moved and empowered everything that we did. There is not a time, a moment, a place, or an instance that God did not really lock into us and give us everything that we've had. When we have our victories, a lot of us turn away from God and just think about ourselves and just boast and think that, you know what, that was all me. What was the point of me even doing everything that I did when I could have done this all along? Sometimes it's not about the outcome, but the journey that God puts you on to make you a better person and to grow you and to strengthen you and for you to rely on God more than anybody else. Luckily for us, Jesus died on the cross, and he let us have the Holy Spirit, so it can't be taken from us. So God is always in us, and Jesus is always around. A lot of times when we have our own victories, we think to ourselves, man, that was all me. Most importantly, we should be thanking God and worshiping, outright praising him for everything that he has done for us, and going back to Jesus at his feet, just worshiping and saying, Jesus, thank you for leading me and being there and being a partner for me and being around when no one else was there and only you guys saw it and saw it through. This is also an amazing part by Joshua because he never forgot his roots. No matter where he went, no matter where he's gone, he's always went back to the book of the law, making sure he does not turn left or right from it. And God rewarded that with continued success. This is important for us because we have the great book of the Bible, the Gospels, the Old Testament, the stories. If we know our Bible, we know our commands, we know what we're supposed to do, we don't turn left or right from it, we will have success that's even greater than Joshua. Jesus says that we will do miracles even greater than him. So just think, if we don't turn from the Bible left or right and we stay true to what the teachings of Jesus and God has given us, how much more success will we have? The world can be a very confusing place, but the Lord in his household and what he has to offer us is so much more bountiful. It has so much more substance than anything on this earth can really provide for us. Let's be more like Joshua, follow the commands, and have absolute faith and trust in what the Lord has said to us.
The Tale of Joshua, chapters 1 through 8.